Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, once again to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again, here to talk to you today about topics on Africa, specifically South Africa in this case. Here on April 27th, 2020, Freedom Day in South Africa, we see updated news about South Africa's plans for President Cyril Ramaphosa's previously announced 500 billion rand stimulus package to help South African business survive the Wuhan coronavirus, or COVID-19 by its scientific name. So famously, before the beginning of April, back in March and into April, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni haughtily told the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank that South Africa would not be approaching either multilateral institution for any help to tide it over. And the questions were about South African sovereignty. With the IMF and World Bank's past history of attaching structural adjustment conditions on money, if one had looked at this, you could have understood their position going back historically. However, the situation is that the IMF and the World Bank had announced that their relief funding and debt relief programs, which were granted to 19 African countries, would not have the normal structural adjustment policy conditions attached to them. That would be much broader, more general, and liberal when it comes to relieving debt and loaning money to countries in this crisis across the developing world, in particular in Africa. So South Africa, the ANC, haughtily told the IMF and the World Bank that they did not need their money and they would not come to them unless it was absolutely necessary. And this all stemmed from questions about protecting and safeguarding South Africa's sovereignty. Let me put that in plain English for you. This is so that the ANC would not have to expose to the world what's really happening with Black economic empowerment, expropriation without compensation, the National Health Insurance Scheme, and various other programs that are undermining the entrepreneurialism and the market-based economy of South Africa and impoverishing millions. Now, folks in the ANC will disagree with my assessment of this, but that's their prerogative. So, on the 13th of April, the IMF announced that it would have a debt relief package for 19 African countries, along 25 countries around the world. This included Ghana and several other countries. So their debt will be relieved under very generous conditions. And some of these folks are going back for another bite of debt relief, having previously gotten debt relief under the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, or HIPC, and Enhanced HIPC, Ghana being a prime example, twice having its debt forgiven and paying nothing back to meet governance standards. In this case, they're not going to be required to meet governance standards. They're simply going to have the debt relieved as a consequence of the burden that was imposing on them in COVID-19. So the IMF and World Bank have decided to relieve that. The ANC at the same time was saying that they had no interest in borrowing money. And then on the 21st, President Ramaphosa announced a 500 billion rand package. Many of us, many analysts in the world looking around at what's happening in South Africa, realizing the coffers are empty, we're asking the very direct and obvious question, where are the 500 billion rand going to come from? There's been a lot of speculation that the government would pilfer this money from people's pension funds or from government pension funds, as well as levying a one-off wealth tax on South Africans. So we're yet to hear more details of it, but one thing we have heard now is news came out today based on a Sunday interview with the National Treasury Director General, Dande Mohalane, spoke, and he was interviewed by Finance 24, and in the course of the interview, he talked about the South African government is now approaching the international multinational lenders, institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and the New Development Bank, also known as the BRICS Bank, approached the three of them to borrow 95 billion rand, or $5 billion US, as part of the 500 billion rand stimulus package to help South Africa get through the COVID-19 crisis. So, after hearing the Treasury Minister repeatedly say that the ANC and South Africa would not approach the multilateral institutions because they intruded on South African sovereignty, and even after the IMF and World Bank had announced there would be little to no strings attached to the funding, they still said they had no interest in borrowing the money. Now here we roll forward to the end of April, hat in hand, the South African Treasury now approaches multilateral institutions asking for the very money that they haughtily and arrogantly said they had no need for. Now, I'm not suggesting that the South African government is obliged to borrow money from multilateral institutions. What I am suggesting is that it was rather short-sighted and strategically stupid to make those statements when the South African government had no resources at its disposal to deal with the crisis unfolding in front of it as a consequence of macroeconomic policies that have failed, macroeconomic policies that have discouraged foreign direct investment and frightened investors away, as well as scared away hundreds of thousands of talented South Africans, black, brown, white, Asian, whatever they are, leaving for better days and better prospects abroad because of the onerous regulation and the discriminatory policies that the ANC has implemented. All of this combines to put South Africa in a precarious state. It was already in recession before COVID-19, and COVID-19 has seriously further exposed the flaws in the economic system in South Africa. The ANC talks a social game. It talks about state ownership and its love of parastatals, and it runs a quasi-market-based economy that is in conflict. And the two of these things don't work very well. In addition to that, the policies they've created, like black economic empowerment and expropriation without compensation, are undermining the interest and the legitimacy of the South African economy. So now they have no choice but to go to the IMF, which I predicted a month ago. They must go to the IMF and World Bank, multilateral institutions. The BRICS Bank or New Development Bank simply doesn't have sufficient resources to take care of all the needs that South Africa currently has. Right. So what are the conditions that the IMF and World Bank are imposing on countries taking these emergency loans from the World Bank? Well, one thing that they're making for the loans is a 1% interest rate. That's right, I said 1%. 1% interest rate. That essentially makes this money a grant in many respects. It's not a grant because ostensibly they'll have to pay it back. But I strongly suspect that down the road, many of these loans will be forgiven or simply ignored by the World Bank and the IMF. This is all part of a multinational response to help developing countries survive this crisis so their economies do not implode. But even if you have to pay the money back, talk about a gift. 1%, that 1% is gone through inflation. It's already gone before you even spend the money. So this is really just a gift. It's a gift. And the South African government was going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Money being tossed their way by the IMF and World Bank, trying to help countries, but their haughty arrogance about their sovereignty. Now, they are a sovereign nation, and we live in a Westphalian system of states, and states are entitled to their sovereignty. But borrowing money at 1%, and you are going to walk away when you have no money in the bank, you got to wonder about that. That's like the consumer that says, you know what, I don't want that credit card because it carries a 1% interest rate. Are you serious? Virtually every other credit card carries a 15 to 25% interest rate, and you're going to pass that one up that has a 1% to keep a card that has 14% or to have no money in the bank? It beggars the imagination. Yet another bizarre macroeconomic decision by the ANC. But now the ANC will go to the World Bank and IMF to borrow money. So a couple of things about this. So ANC spokesman Pule Mabe indicated the ANC may have softened its line or its stance on further borrowing from the IMF that could have more conditions. So they're now being more cognizant of the fact that after the COVID-19 crisis, they may need to borrow money. Now, that's a consequence not of COVID-19, although that could exacerbate and contribute to it. This is a consequence of the ANC's macroeconomic policies in advance of COVID-19, which had pushed the economy into recession and which has weakened the rand, now pushing 20 to $1. At the end of apartheid, the rand was 3.4 to the dollar, something like that, or $3 the rand, something. But now it's nearly 20 to 1. Right, so that's one thing. Bloomberg's Africa economist Bongatio Hasalawe said that the ANC are trying as much as possible to work within the existing envelope, so there's very little new discretionary spending. This is good for debt sustainability, but not great for stimulating growth without accelerating structural reform. And there's the bottom line, folks. Accelerating structural reform. The African National Congress, the ruling party of South Africa, must structurally adjust their economy. They don't need the World Bank. They don't need the IMF to do this. They can do it themselves. They simply have to decide to do it and stop playing all the games that they're playing when it comes to South Africa's economy. Well, there you have it. Pride cometh before the fall. The African National Congress, the ruling party in South Africa, haughtily tells the World Bank and IMF just a little over a month ago that they will not borrow money from either multilateral institution. That instead they can go alone and do it on their own. So here we roll forward now, and President Cyril Ramaphosa wants a 500 billion rand rescue package for South Africa, and the South African officials look around, there's no money. So now the ANC has approached the multilateral institutions to borrow money. So thank you very much. If you like the content, I ask that you push the subscribe button right down there. Remember to push that little bell icon to get personalized notifications from my videos and live streams. And please, if you like the content at all, give me a like. It drives viewership. So we'll see you next time here on Indaba Africa. Thanks for tuning in, folks.